Hey everyone, my name is Brighton. I am here with Pastor Jay, who just gave our last sermon on Sunday in the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, verses 8 and 9. And so thanks, Jay, for being here with me. Just kind of
glad to be here.
Talking a little bit, digging into your sermon a little bit more. So the first verse, verse 8, the blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And one of the things that I really liked was that you quoted D.A. Carson and talked about our single-mindedness being able to seek God. And then you had the windshield analogy that I also really liked, that as we focus on God, the windshield becomes more clear, as in like here in the winter season when it gets real frosty, then we put on our defroster and then it opens up. So I like that. Is there anything more along those lines that you'd like to dig a little bit deeper on?
Yeah, I think the challenge for all of us, and the challenge that I would put out to everyone, is as you think about that analogy or think about that state of being pure-hearted or single-minded pursuit of God.
Yeah.
So to be more specific with everybody in a personal application kind of a way, what are the things for each of us, that those things that are on our windshields right now, right here still early 2024, I'm still stuck in New Year's mode a little bit.
Yeah.
But what are those things that we could identify and say, if I were to take this out of my life somewhat, if I were to remove this, I would actually get a clearer view of God. And this would be a way that I could express more single-minded devotion to God. And I mean, that could be something as straightforward as like, maybe I spend too much time on social media.
Yeah.
And so the things that distract me, or I put my time into those things and then I don't focus on my relationship with God. Mm-hmm. Or there could be areas of, relational difficulty that we know we need to resolve, or places where we know we're caught up in sin and we need to release that to God.
Yeah.
But those things, as we can clear those off the windshield, then it'll just pave the way for a more open and intimate relationship with God. And then that reinforces our desire to have even more of that. But the point being, how do we think specifically about that for each of us, and what are the things that I can do to make that actually happen? What's the point of personal application for me, and to spend a little bit of time reflecting on that. So that's what I would challenge people to think more deeply about.
Cool, great. And then the second verse, in verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And one of the things that you had mentioned was peace is a chief characteristic of God. And you kind of related that into the verse, that we will be called children of God. Other people outside of the church, when they're looking at the church, they should be able to see that we are peacemakers, because that's a chief characteristic of God. And I really like that. And then you also showed the video of the tribe in Fiji.
Right.
And I just find that like crazy how God works in those moments sometimes, that like that was not your intention to watch, like when you were watching that show.
Right.
And it just like struck you that, wow, like this goes really well. So I love when God just kind of comes in.
I had no higher spiritual purpose in watching a show on sailing around the South Pacific.
Yeah.
But then God surprised me with that, and just another example of how he has been at work in the world, and how the gospel literally has brought transformation to societies in the world. And do we still believe that God will do that through the gospel?
Right.
Are we still willing to? I mean, think of what it must have meant more than 200 years ago for those missionaries to leave their homes in England, to sail literally halfway around the world, ish, at least, to live in a culture completely not their own, to have to learn languages, to expose themselves to the dangers of the open seas and diseases that they've never been exposed to, possibly people that might be hostile to them. But then to get to know people in that culture and to teach them about the God of heaven who created them, who loved them, and to say, you can have a relationship with God through his son, and then this is what God teaches you in that. Yeah. And it's going to bring peace to your nation, your tribe. It's going to bring peace between tribes and people that have been at war, literally bashing each other's skulls in for hundreds of years. But that's the power of the gospel. And are we willing ourselves to undergo that kind of discomfort? Do we have that kind of dedication?
Yeah.
So in that show and being surprised in that, there's a real call to missions in that, I think. Not only, and it's not always on the other side of the world, but it always involves discomfort for us. And it always involves getting to know somebody at a level that takes work in order to be able to reach them with the gospel. But when we do that, then the Holy Spirit transforms lives through that. So, I mean, what a great calling for all of us to pursue and to think about, where is God asking us to step into that kind of a role?
Yeah.
So that's inspiring to me.
Yeah. And it's like we read in Acts, the early church, that them going out and then hundreds or thousands of people hearing the gospel, and then their lives are being transformed. But it sometimes is hard for us now in the modern times to think, can God still do that? But
Right.
God is still capable
Right.
of doing that.
Yeah.
Like the video said.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of your sermon, you wrapped up and you kind of combined both verses in 1 John chapter 3 and just being able to see both aspects in that of pure in heart and also peacemakers.
Right. Yeah. Just again, running across that verse, it wasn't like when I started working on the message, that verse was nowhere in my mind. But just referencing some of those phrases of being children of God, and you know, that verse is kind of, we recall that phrase about what great love the Father has lavished on us that we could be called children of God. So I think of just looking that up, and I was like, man, look at the themes that are brought together in these verses that kind of encapsulate most of what is in these beatitudes. And you know, I think in some sense, John, having been a good student of Jesus, he was reflecting what he had heard from Jesus and also what he had learned in all those years as an apostle to put into practice. But just amazing, that idea that as we have this hope of seeing Jesus, the very last line of those verses says, we will purify ourselves as we have that hope.
Yes.
And then we'll see him as he is, but then we'll be like him when we see him.
Yes.
And there's a mystery in that. So the more we pursue that, again, that purity, that single-minded devotion towards God, we have the hope of seeing him and being like him. But yet the more we even pursue that and understand who he is now and become more like him, even in this life, then that becomes a cycle that reinforces itself and gives us the hope that we will see him. So there's a mysterious cycle happening there. But then that we will actually see him, I mean, jackpot.
Yeah.
We will see God, we will see Christ in his glory, be welcomed into his presence. And then he's the first fruits from those who have risen from the dead. And then we will be made like him. We will be transformed, like Paul said, in the twinkling of an eye.
Yeah.
And all the rest of the imperfections that are still on our windshield, in that moment will be taken away, and we will
full windshield.
We will be like him, full windshield.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So amazing promise.
Yeah, indeed it is.
So that's 1 John chapter 3. Those first couple of verses.
Yeah, first few verses.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Pastor Jay, for being here with me and just kind of digging deeper into that.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching out there. And Pastor Ron is going to be wrapping up our Beatitudes series this Sunday. So hopefully you can come back and check that out. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.